If you work for the Catholic Church and want to avoid burnout, overcome team dysfunctions, and put more souls in the pews, we're here to help. I'm Ty Hua, here with my co-host John Kahns, and we're providing leadership development for Catholic ministry professionals. Every week, you can expect engaging discussions, expert interviews, and actionable advice to help you move Jesus' mission forward in your parish. Today, we're having a conversation with a real live Catholic ministry professional. Brian Miller, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, glad to be with you guys. I'm glad we could line something up and have this conversation. It should be fun.
Absolutely. And
I
Brian,
always laugh a little bit. Sorry, I always like, a real professional. I mean, Catholic ministry professional. It sounds so fancy as a kid who just, loved Jesus a lot and got into youth ministry. I guess we've come a long way or something.
Absolutely. It is amazing to me how the field has developed even in my time being in the profession. But my mom actually was a DRE too. So I can even pick her brain on the last, 30, 40 years of youth ministry, directors of religious education, how that whole field has kind of developed from something you might get certified in to now we've got 4-year degrees and people are coming out of college and are, for all intents and purposes, trained professionals entering into the evangelization field. We're entering into the vineyard. And so we are excited. I'm sure you deal with a lot of them in your work as the director of evangelization and discipleship for the Archdiocese of St. Louis. And I just would love for you to have a chance to tell our listeners about yourself. So I'm just going to get out of the way, give them kind of the spiel. Who is Brian Miller and what does he do? What does your ministry look like?
Yeah, so I've been at the Archdiocese for about 12 and a half years doing a variety of different roles. But, before that, of course, like many testimonies, I was born and raised Catholic, cradle Catholic, but really for me, my big kind of conversion moment came when Pope John Paul II came to St. Louis in 1999. So, my mom, single mom, doing her best, trying to raise us. And we went to church every week, but we didn't talk about Jesus a lot at home because she was just kind of all over the place, working as a nurse, working crazy hours. And so I always say that faith was something we talked about at grandma's house more than we talked about at home. And it was very evident and alive at grandma's house. But it didn't mean a lot to me. So going into high school, I did what many, high school kids do. And I started trying to settle in and find any group of friends. And I settled with some guys who maybe weren't the best influence, who were going into a party scene and drugs and alcohol and stuff like that. And I started kind of dabbling in those waters a little bit. And they said that the Pope was going to come to St. Louis in 1999, and he was going to have this big, youth visit. He's going to have a big papal mass at the Dome where the Rams played. R.I.P. St. Louis Rams. They've now moved on to L.A. That's all right. And they were going to do in the hockey arena where the Blues played. They were going to do a youth rally. So I kind of felt like, if you're going to get a chance to see the president or see some kind of political figure or celebrity, like, I feel like you should go. Like, I didn't have any strong love or feelings towards the Pope. I was Catholic enough. We still went to mass, but it didn't mean anything to me. So if you had a chance to meet the president, you go meet the president or see the president, regardless of your political affiliation or how you feel about the person holding the office. You respect the office. So it's kind of how I felt as a Catholic. In the background, I had a friend who was inviting me again and again and again to visit with him at his youth ministry, to go to their Life Teen program down the street. And I was, a grade school friend. And I said, no, I've got some new friends now. I've got meeting new people at my new school and going down that road. And I just kind of kept telling him, no. But all the same time, going down this path, and I just didn't have a lot of peace or happiness. But this just seemed like the next phase of life. So the Pope comes, and I had been to hockey games at the Enterprise Center. I had been to concerts there. I'd been to like high energy, high volume events at this building, but this was a little bit different. And there was a certain energy in the room that was just a little bit different. And it got just as loud as it did at any other moment when the Blues scored a goal or there was a fight in the game or whatever it might be. And there was all this huge buildup to when the Pope came. And, Pope John Paul II at this point wasn't a super impressive man physically, right? He was suffering from the effects of Parkinson's. He was aging. And there was this huge buildup to him coming, and he kept getting delayed because, when you're the Pope, everyone wants to shake your hand and meet you. So coming into the building, he got stopped 100 times. They didn't get him out on the stage as quickly as they thought he would. So they're always like, the Pope's going to be here in 5 more minutes. And the crowd would go wild and get excited and cheer as loud as you've ever heard. And then 5 minutes later, they'd be like, the Pope's going to be here in 5 minutes, and there was just this huge thing. And then finally the moment came, they said the Pope is in the building. They showed a picture of him in the hallway, and he's meeting Mark McGuire, because this was like right after the big home run chase with him and Sammy Sosa doing all that. And he's meeting him and doing all these other things. And then finally he comes wheeling in on this golf cart. He's on the back of a golf cart, standing up, and he's kind of almost like hunched over, right? Because Parkinson's has really had this effect on him. And he's hunched over, and he just looks ill. He looks kind of sick. He doesn't look strong. And the crowd goes wild. But it wasn't just volume, right? It wasn't just noise. That something in that moment changed. What you realized, and what I know now, is that what the Holy Father brought with him in that moment was a spirit of God. That he brought with him the presence of God and the Holy Spirit. That he was the man full of the Holy Spirit. And that for me changed me. Just that one little moment of recognizing that what was going on all around me, the excitement, the energy around my faith, around who God was, around who this old man was wheeling into the room, I didn't have it, and I was missing something. So I wouldn't say I had it all figured out in that one moment, but what it did was it helped me realize I had a void in my life and helped me to start asking the question. So then the next week when my friend invited me to his youth ministry, I said yes. And the next week I said yes. So much to the point that it got to the point where my mom wanted to punish me in high school. I got grounded from going to church, so it was my, Wednesday, Sunday, we'd go up for Thursday night on Bible study. We'd go down to the soup kitchens and serve the poor. And I was just all in because I was finding community. I was finding investment, and I was finding just fulfillment and meaning that I had kind of been searching for, but I didn't realize I was searching for. So one thing led to another, and I just kept giving the Lord my life and saying yes. So that eventually led me to Benedictine College, where I was going to study theology and youth ministry up there. Really a golden time up there. Made a lot of wonderful friends. I got to study under Dr. Edward Sri for 4 years while he was still at Benedictine on campus there, and just found a group of people who would push me and challenge me. And we all ran together towards Jesus just to become who the Lord was calling us to be. So that was really a great time of formation and growth, and taking kind of this, excited, immature high school faith into mature Christian faith and discipleship, and learning why we believe what we do, and trying to figure out what my next step would be in ministry. So from there, I went to become a focused missionary for 4 years, served on a few different campuses, 3 expansion campuses in 3 years. So I got to meet a lot of new people and help start up focus programs at new schools, and learned a lot in that time. And Focus does such a great job of what you're talking about leadership development, about investing in the next generation of leaders, of teaching them the practical skills, but also just the primacy of the spiritual life in ministry. And I'm really grateful for that investment in me that they made those 4 years, which launched me into a career at the Archdiocese. So I took a year off of ministry after I was finished being a missionary. I'd gotten married, and I knew I wanted to work in ministry long term. I knew I wanted to work for the church, but I didn't want to just go somewhere because that was the easy fit. So I took a job in sales while helping out and doing some youth ministry part-time at my home parish on the side. And a job opened up at the Archdiocese as director of young adult ministry. And it was a friend of the family that had hired me. And I came home and looked at my wife and I said, I have to quit my job. And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, the perfect job just opened up. And I know this family was so good, and they hired me and they brought me in, and they've been training me and teaching me sales and learning some corporate skills. I said, but I have to quit. I'm going to break their hearts, and I think they knew probably that I wasn't like long-term going to be in sales for them. I think they knew this was kind of a holdover, but it just felt like it was going to be the perfect thing, a perfect fit. So I got the job and did youth ministry or young adult ministry for a few years, 4 years at the diocese. Then I got bumped up a notch. My boss was a priest. They made him a pastor and gave me his job overseeing youth, young adult, sports, retreats, Newman Centers, a few different things, and serving on Archbishop Carlson's leadership team. And then about 6 months before he left St. Louis and retired, he asked me to take on the role of director of evangelization. So kind of setting up for the next guy to come in and knowing where we were. This is right as COVID was ramping up. I was stepping into this role of director of evangelization, recognizing that we had a pretty uphill battle coming on the other side of this. So it's been a beautiful path, been a beautiful career, and I've really felt. I tell people all the time I've had a front row seat to hope in the church, and that a lot of people, their experience of the church is they look out and say gray hair and empty pews, and that has just never been my experience of the church. That the Lord is moving, the Lord is alive, good is winning, there's revival and there's renewal in the church. And it's really exciting to get to be a part of it.
It's good to hear such a message of hope coming out, because so many times, in a big part of our ministry, a big part of the kind of the impetus for this podcast was really my experience of hearing so many Catholic ministry professionals getting frustrated in their work. And that is what happens when we take our
Well,
eyes off of
it is
Jesus.
frustrating work sometimes.
Absolutely. And so one of our big desires with the podcast, and especially when we have expert interviews like we do today, one of our big desires is to speak into those areas of frustration. And so I'm sure in your role as the director of evangelization and discipleship, you do hear a lot of those frustrations. So I wonder if you could just speak into a little bit, in your experience, just as you're working, what are some of the chief frustrations that are coming out and that people are dealing with in a general, in kind of a general way right now, and maybe what are some of the approaches to working through those frustrations and maybe finding solutions for them?
Yeah, I think we had the Seek conference here in St. Louis this year and last year. We were really blessed to have it. 20,000 plus people here in the Archdiocese, phenomenal talks. And kind of the star of the conference this year in many ways was Monsignor Shea, who's the president up at University of Mary. And he gave a keynote that just everyone was talking about afterwards. But actually, he gave another session that was a breakout session, and it was I think the title of it was something like, loving the church in a post-Christian world or postmodern world or something like that. And he threw out this beautiful history lesson for maybe the first 15 or 20 minutes. And he talked about the Enlightenment, and he talked about where we are today and all these, and you're like, where are you going with this as far as the title of your talk, but what it really was he was highlighting for us that we have this image of the church and what's been painted for us in Enlightenment and this kind of project of modernity in many ways is that we can perfect the church, that we can achieve our own perfection. And we're told we can perfect everything we do. And the scientific method is this method of refinement on the path to perfection. And we take that ideal and we apply it to the church. And we think, okay, I'm doing all the right things. I'm doing everything I can. Why haven't I achieved this improvement or this perfection in the church? So he talked about this Enlightenment idea of utopia and how that's kind of actually disenfranchised us from a proper understanding of what the church on earth is. The church herself is a perfect society. It has everything it needs within itself contained, but it doesn't always manifest itself perfectly. So we get this idea that that we can be the agent of perfection instead of letting the Lord perfect it in us. And so you see that, that's kind of a broad, maybe slightly theoretical answer, but then you see that start to play out at every single level. I say, why is my pastor so frustrating? Not my pastor personally. I love my pastor, but
I'm sure he's great.
He's wonderful. No, he is really good. But you see this in parishes all the time. You say, if my pastor would just do this, then we would be fine. And you try to influence, you try to do it. And people get really burned out when they're not seeing the fruit of their big dreams and plans. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about a lot of people who work in ministry is that they have these big ideas and they got into ministry because they wanted to make a difference and they have a big heart and they want to impact and change the church in a good way, according to even the Lord's desires. And then you go work in the church and the church is very human, and it's not always that manifestation of what we expect it to be or what you think it's going to be going in. And so, working at the diocese, sometimes you see behind the curtain, you see different people pulling the levers, or you see, the other analogy, right, is how the sausage is made. And there's just moments that are hard in that. And you said it earlier, it's if we're not rooted in prayer and if we really don't feel called to where we are, if we don't have a real sense of mission and calling, then we get really frustrated sometimes. And I think, we've helped out at youth ministry at our home parish for many years now. And my wife has this great line. She goes, sometimes we live across the street from our parish. So it's like the Lord gave us the house at a huge discount for a house we probably couldn't have afforded, but it's like the Lord put it in our laps and gave us this great opportunity. She's like, sometimes I just feel like Jonah, like the Lord just spit me out here and said, go do an impossible job, but the beautiful part of that story is that it's not an impossible job if the Lord's the one who's planning it and who's doing it. So really just understanding that purpose of calling, that Jonah knew that this was the Lord's plan. And if we have trust and can be people of prayer and have that time of prayer and discernment and kind of rest in the Lord and what his plan is for us, then it makes the work a lot more doable, and just kind of be unflappable in the face of adversity, to know that there are going to be hard days, but to have, the relationship of trust and prayer, and then also to have other people you can lean on that can set you straight sometimes too, that you have a group of friends and a group of colleagues, ideally, that you pray with and you share with, who can shake you out of your idealism or perfectionism or whatever it might be along the way, to help keep you grounded about what the mission is and the good that you are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I do love that, and we've actually heard a number of people kind of say that there's this, whether you're just coming out of college or whether you've been in ministry for years, you started probably because you desired to help people to know the Lord Jesus. You desired to evangelize, to preach the gospel, to do all those things, and then sometimes you feel like you're just maintaining a program, and that gets tedious and old. So in our framework, the Catholic Ministry Professionals framework, it always has to start with that discernment. One, are you called to ministry? Were you genuinely called here? Two, what is God calling you to do now in the context of your ministry? So that it's not just, it's not just John's plan for, Saint whatever church. No, this is what God wants us to do. And what that does is it does a few things. One, you're connected to the wellspring. That's first and foremost. You're connected to the wellspring. So he's constantly pouring fresh water into your cup, and you can pour that out over people, or it overflows out onto others. The second thing is, when you know that this initiative, this vision, whatever, picture you're painting for people and the thing that you're calling them to forward, whatever that might be, if you have discerned that from prayer, from the heart of God, it makes all the other things, it puts them in their proper place where we are following God and his will. So when Ethel comes up to you and she's upset because you've changed this thing about the ministry, you now have the weight of God behind that decision. And it's a lot easier to enter into that conversation and say, well, we're doing this because this is what God is calling us to do. Right? It gives a lot of weight, a lot of comfort, a lot of confidence entering into difficult conversations. And it gives a lot more motivation behind following through on hard tasks and the extra work that it might create to transition, to implement change, to move the ball forward in the mission of the church. And so I think you're nailing that right on the
Well,
head there, the more we can point people to it.
yeah, and I think a lot about fruitfulness, and success is not always measured in numbers. Anyone who's worked in youth ministry knows that sometimes, right? We know that sometimes there's kids. You have a night where one kid or two kids shows up, or whatever it is. We've all had those moments, but where is the Lord bearing fruit? Where is he bearing fruit in your own life and in the people you're serving and the programs you're running? And if we lose track of that idea of fruitfulness, and this is not, the temptation there very quickly can become, to get into a gospel of prosperity. If you're doing the right thing, the Lord will bless it. And that's not exactly, what we're saying. What we're saying is that there needs to be fruit somewhere in your life and your ministry. And sometimes that fruit is in suffering. And sometimes that fruit is only in you, and you don't see it elsewhere in the people that you're trying to serve or what you're doing. But if you can't point to where the Lord's moving, you're going to make a really bad evangelist, because it all starts with what the Lord's doing in and through you first.
Mhm. Can you maybe speak with a little more about that? How you balance the spiritual side with the practical side of ministry, just in the sense of it's not all about the numbers, but the numbers do matter. Could you kind of break that open a little bit, since you kind of bring up that fruit?
Yeah, I
What
mean,
does it look like to find that fruit?
one of the things I like to talk about in the church is leading and lagging indicators. So we tend to measure the lagging indicators, right? So we measure mass attendance and number of converts in our CIA, and we measure giving and things like that. But really, there's some other, instead of the key measurements, maybe there's some key markers of success. And are we doing the things that we believe and are convicted are going to lead to fruitfulness? So if we're convicted about a discipleship methodology, that the gospel is fundamentally spread interpersonally, and that programs are great, but programs are often a vehicle for relationships to develop and for that discipleship to happen. Okay, so if that's our fundamental conviction, are we doing the types of things that create the spaces for those relationships to develop? So if we're convicted about interpersonal discipleship, do we have small groups in our parish? Do we have programs and spaces where those types of relationships can become and be fostered and things like that. Or half the time, one of the biggest one of the biggest things we don't do well in our parishes and sometimes at dioceses is we don't have a plan and stick to it. So actually, faithfulness to your plan is a great indicator of fruitfulness along the way too, because sometimes it takes a while for that fruitfulness to show up. There's a great book on prayer called Time for God by Father Jacques Philippe. And it's a really simple introduction to prayer and how to pray and why to pray and all that. And one of the points he makes in the book is that there are, you need to have a firm commitment to prayer, and you need to kind of tell yourself and tell the Lord how long you're going to pray. Okay, today I'm going to do 20 minutes of silent contemplative prayer. Great. And he says that the Lord will often withhold the graces from the prayer until the last little bit, until your last minute or two of prayer. So you might sit there for 18 minutes of prayer and you might just feel as dead can be inside about your prayer and be really frustrated and say, why am I here? Why am I doing this? And the temptation is to leave after 15 minutes when you had committed to 20. But in some ways, like, the Lord is kind of testing your faithfulness and wants you to give him everything. And so that last little bit of prayer and leaving prayer can be the outpouring of grace that you need in your life. So sometimes in our planning, it can be the same way, that the Lord is, just like Israel and the Exodus and all the great stories of the Old Testament, the Lord there's like a constant, like, just test of faithfulness, saying, do you trust me? Do you trust that I am who I say I am, that I am the God of miracles, that I am the God of Israel, I am the Lord of your life and your heart? And if you stay faithful, like, you have nothing to worry about. So I think a lot of times we get kind of shiny ball syndrome. We run from one thing to the next. There's another great program or whatever it is. And we don't just, like, trust in our initial discernment of what the Lord told us and who we are. So if we can really be committed to that. And then I also don't think, the other part of that question is, I don't think that we can always make such a strong dichotomy of, like, the business side of things and the spiritual side of things. And I really think that we need to integrate those things more regularly than we do. So at a parish staff meeting, I mean, a lot of parishes don't even have staff meetings. That'd be a great place to start.
Not good ones anyway.
Well, but it's out there, and
Yeah.
everyone's out there kind of doing what they see is right in the eyes of the Lord, if you will. But to have a parish staff meeting and have some of that time talk about where you're seeing fruit in your own life and in your ministries in the parish, and you say, "Oh, I'm an admin person at the parish. I just answer the phones." Okay, well, if you can't answer the phone and pray with someone whose father just died on the phone, or when they come in to plan the funeral or whatever, like, then you're missing something about what it means to be on mission in the church, and that every single person who's on our staff needs to be involved in the mission in one way or another. So if we can't share those areas of fruitfulness, it's because we're not disposing ourselves to receive and see the fruitfulness as much as we can. So we need to beg the Lord to show that to us. So we need to be really, I think, just diligent about, like, there is no separation of these two things. That the little things are the big things. The administrative things can be the ministry things, and that we need a desire for excellence on both sides of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in my mind, it's faith and works, right? If you have the faith, you're going to do the works. I mean, it naturally leads to those. I'm curious, have you read the Four Disciplines of Execution?
I have not.
I forget if it's Stephen Covey who does that. Oh, what you're saying sounds exactly like that, and it's one of those first books that I read where it's a great read, and I think it's a really great training resource for people who work in ministry. Because, like you said, we get that shiny object syndrome, and their whole thing is identify the one thing, the one goal that if we change that it'll have the most impact on those lag measures. And so then identifying the next step is identify the lead measures that'll lead to those lag measures or affect that. So even it's something as simple as saying, like you said, the phone calls, right? Um, if you're not comfortable inviting someone to pray on the phone, well, you're probably not actually doing anything spiritual, right? Which is the most important part of our work.
It's just a missed opportunity then. Yeah.
Yeah. And a team could literally say, hey, we're gonna create, what we want is to open up the spiritual side of our parish. We want to, like, invoke the Spirit and bring it into all of this. So everybody on the team, I want each of you to invite someone to pray, 5 different people to pray at some point in any given week. And just even doing that, like saying, this is what we need to do, is train ourselves as a staff to evangelize, to invoke the Lord, to, like, just usher in a new age of the Spirit in our parish. And the way we're going to measure that is you need to invite 5 people to pray. And it's going to be a little uncomfortable. It's going to get you out of your zone, but it is a lead measure that can lead to those other leg measures, more fruitfulness in the spirit, tuning ourselves more into what God is doing in the parish and how he's working in us and through us to bring people back to himself. And so
I
there's
mean,
really practical ways you can score that. And when you come to your next team meeting, everybody goes, "Oh, I got 4 people." Okay, well, why didn't you just ask one other person? You could have asked me. I mean, it's just having those conversations and really creating genuine forward momentum and real practical standard operating procedures that lead to success.
yeah, I mean, when you look at like, and you do an examination of conscience, it's like
Mhm,
that's a measurement of success in your own personal life, right? So a good
mhm,
someone introduced to me recently a great examination of conscience that is based on the fruits of the spirit, right? So where is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, all those things, like where are they in my life? And so am I measuring leading or lagging? That's a leading indicator examination of conscience. I'm not measuring where sin is in my life necessarily or whatever, but I'm saying here's the positive virtues that I wanted to exemplify. How am I living those on a day-to-day basis versus maybe a 10 commandments one is maybe more of like a lagging indicator examination of conscience, right? When have I killed? When have I, or like not honored the Lord or the Sabbath or all those different things. So I think we see different examples of that in our spiritual life, but we need to figure out a way to integrate it and incorporate it more into our day-to-day parish life.
yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious. I want to give you an opportunity too, because we talk about some of the frustrations, some of the things that aren't being done well or could be done better. I'm just wondering, where are some places where you see ministry being done really well? And this just, you can brag on anybody. It can be in your diocese, outside the diocese, in a parish, in a school, and Ascension, or Word on Fire. One of those. What are some of the places you really see ministry being done well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's some great apostolates. I mentioned Focus. I had the great privilege to be a missionary, and none of these apostolates are perfect, but I think there's some that have some really good and beautiful things going on. And I think that one of the things we've been talking about around here lately is that the Lord is really blessing apostolates that have a focus on making disciples, a very discipleship oriented methodology, and like keyword is like making, like not just like hoping for disciples, but like making disciples. So Life Teen, I think, is doing a great job of that in terms of their training and formation investment. Focus is doing a great job of that. I love the work of the Augustine Institute, and some big news about them and potentially in St. Louis here recently as well. But I think that their focus is on, very charismatic understanding, core gospel presentation, understanding of all the different programs they have and sacramental programs and things where they're really helping people focus on the fundamentals and the basics of preaching the gospel and assuming nothing and things like that. And then I see some um, beautiful renewal happening with just people in parishes. That the conversations I'm having now in parishes are different than the conversations I was having 3 years ago, even. And that we've been through a big planning process here in St. Louis, strategic planning, closing, merging parishes, doing all the ugly behind the curtain things that we talk about in the church, and that are just hard realities of where we are in terms of vocations and numbers and population shift to different parts of our diocese, leaving some of our parishes smaller and more empty. But in the parishes I get to work with, we've been talking about evangelization. And we say the reason we're doing the planning is so that evangelization can flourish in this next generation. And people are asking the hard questions. They're asking the real questions. And there's a real hunger and aptitude for doing the hard, slow work of evangelization, of doing it kind of person by person, of doing it one relationship at a time, and trying to find ways to integrate that into parish life. So there's a program I wrote called Equip. It's like a small group discipleship training program. It's, if you're a Seinfeld fan, it's like they have the coffee table book on coffee tables. It folds into a coffee table. This is a discipleship program about discipleship that models and uses discipleship to do it. So it's like you get together with 4 or 5 people and you go deep, and you do 13 weeks together, and then you kind of split up and try to spiritually multiply. So I've piloted that a few places and seen a bunch more parishes pick it up. And to work with just the leaders. These are not, some of them are the priests are a little bit involved, but some of it's just lay leaders who are just really hungry for a deeper formation about evangelization, about discipleship, about following the Lord. And just to see their hunger and desire to go really deep in it and to bring people into the church. It's just, I think there's something is shifting. And I think that, in the United States church, you saw, right around the same time that Pope Francis releases Joy of the Gospel, Sherry Waddell released her book, Forming Intentional Disciples. And that combination of just a shift of language. Now we have to define our terms, and sometimes people mean different things when they say evangelization, or some people mean something else when they say discipleship. But we're developing an appetite and a hunger for conversion, for bringing people into relationship with Jesus. The Catechism talks about repentance as a radical reorientation of your life towards Christ, leaving behind what was there before. And I think what I'm seeing is the day to day is that there's a hunger for people to say yes to that. And there's a hunger and a desire and a courage and a boldness for people to take a risk to live like that, to invite people into that in their day-to-day lives, that they're, still maybe a little bit fearful, but less worried about rejection or what people think because they understand what's on the line. So I have tremendous hope for the renewal that we're seeing in the church, and for people who are willing to take the risk to ask the question, to make that invitation. It's really been a beautiful thing.
Mhm. Hey, did you mention, I missed it, the name of the program that does the discipleship program within a discipleship program
Oh,
is
it's
being
called
piloted?
Equip. Yeah, it's on our website. If you go to
Okay.
archstl.org/evangelization, and we're in the process of reformatting it. So we're going to publish a new version of it soon, or whatever. This is kind of the beta booklet is on there, but
Yeah.
it's been really fruitful for people just to go in and do 12, 13 weeks. I think it might be 14 now with the reformat, but together with the same people, and they're sharing life and they're sharing Christ. And it's really been, it's been really fruitful.
And is that available to anybody could do
Yeah,
that,
it's all on
pick
the
it up? I
website. Yeah.
would be a great resource for our
Yeah.
listeners, the parishes that are listening right now. And so they can just go to the Archdiocesan website and
Yeah.
search for Equip.
archstl.org/evangelization, and you'll find some of our different resources on there. So
Okay, great. That's a great tool for people to know about. Great. So next question here. One everybody wants to know. If you had the attention of the whole world for 90 seconds, what would you say?
be saints. No, it's a good one to start with, but I love the St. Catherine of Siena quote that if you are what you are meant to be, you'll set the world on fire. And I think the really beautiful thing there is that, the key beginning of that is discernment about who the Lord is calling me to be. And C.S. Lewis has a great quote that says, how monotonously alike are all the great tyrants of the world. They all wanted money and power and all the things, but how gloriously unique are the saints. And that the key to becoming a saint is becoming who the Lord means for you to be, who you ought to be. And that if we can get really intentional about excellence in that, and get off of cruise control in our personal life and our parish life and our institutional life, and really be committed to being saints, which requires two words we've been talking about around here a lot is vulnerability and accountability. And that unless we're honest about where we are and what we need, we're not going to make a lot of progress. But unless we have people around us who are encouraging us, and accountability is not just top down. We think of it as top down, but I think the best kind of accountability is fraternal accountability, mutual accountability, sideways accountability, where we can look at each other and say, this is who you said you wanted to be. How's it going? How are you going in that fight? And I think actually that accountability is one of like the really missing links for us in terms of growth and renewal in the church, that we're just, Pat Lencioni talks about this in leadership all the time in his work with Amazing Parish and his books. He said, we're just afraid to hurt people's feelings by asking the hard question, and having that healthy conflict. And no one's worse at it than we are in the church sometimes. So if we can get really honest about striving for excellence and holding each other to account for that excellence, from a real place of charity and love, then I think we're going to go be those. That's what's going to help us be saints.
I get a sense, and I don't know if you get the same sense too. The more that we do this podcast and we talk about what's needed in the church, and there's an obvious need for this discernment of gifts. There's this obvious need for people to understand the role they play in discipleship and evangelization, how they're all called to it. And in my mind, that the way that's playing out in my brain, and just as I'm forecasting, I think the Spirit is priming us to realize that we need to refocus our energies on adult formation. I get a really strong sense about that. Not that youth formation isn't important, but it's kind of a backwards model where we know that If you've got 100 families in the parish and you're doing religious ed as your main push, you might get a handful of catechists that are willing to come in and do it. On the other hand, if you've got 100 families and you've really focused on equipping, evangelizing, calling into missionary discipleship, those adults, you should actually have 200 catechists, right? Mom and dad for each of those families that are then naturally passing the faith on in a more robust, in a more natural way, gifted and graced in their vocation as parents to raise those kids. And I just get a sense. What's your kind of feel, your bead on that?
Yeah, I don't think we should do anything less for youth because I don't think we're doing enough already.
Sure.
Yeah, so even in the places where we have a decent investment in youth ministry, it's actually probably just the bare minimum. We just need to get everyone else off the sidelines for adult formation and to take their faith seriously. And that comes with obviously conviction about who Jesus is and about what he means for your life and why Jesus matters in your life. So it really comes back to those kind of fundamentals of evangelization. So I don't disagree that we need a stronger focus on adult formation. And I think sometimes people say that at the, and I'm not saying you were saying this, but some people say that at the expense of youth ministry. Well, let's cut our youth program and reinvest all the money over here. Like, no, just buck up and take a risk. And I think if you invested in stewardship in your parish, like hire a full-time stewardship person or communications person or whatever, and educate people about what stewardship is, and you're gonna have enough money to pay for everything. And maybe I'm rottenly spoiled in my work, but there's always been enough money to do the important work that where there's a calling of the Lord, like the resources tend to show up. And again, not a gospel of prosperity, but I just think that the Lord, is going to bless those things, and people will donate and be generous when they see fruitfulness and when they see stories of hope. And I think that we're really good, and I've been guilty of this too, but really good at like telling stories of doom and gloom in the church. We like our scare tactics. We look at every graphic and all the numbers just point down all the time. Here's the chart of mass attendance down, giving down, everything's down, school attendance down. And we can sit around and complain about the problems and identify the problems. And identifying the problems is really not that hard because they're right there in our face. What takes a lot more courage is to chart a path forward and to help people move forward with a lot of hope. And I think we've got to start talking about what the solutions are more than the problems. And we've got to start really just having confidence and telling the stories of hope of where the Lord is moving. And as we see that, it gives you hope and courage and confidence to go be a part of that story too. So to plan it out and map it out and invest deeply. And I think that in order to invest deeply, we've got to risk being hurt. That's that word vulnerability from earlier too. Like we've got to risk failure, and we're so afraid of failure, and we're not comfortable with that. I was having a conversation with a guy who used to be the director of innovation at Anheuser-Busch, 20 years ago. That's quite the title, quite the job, and Anheuser-Busch, at one point, maybe I don't like some of their more recent innovations of their marketing and things like that. But for a while, they're a very innovative and cutting edge company there. And he said, innovators need space and permission to fail within their organizations, to take risks and to do things that don't make sense on the 5-year plan or from the ledger line necessarily. And he said, and the church is a terrible place for that because everyone just fears failure, and it's a cover your butt mentality. Everyone's risk averse and everything like that. But we need to be willing to try things that may not work, because if you're not failing, you're not trying. And I say that to people all the times in terms of sharing the gospel and evangelization. Go evangelize poorly, go fail. And when you fail, you realize what you can do better the next time or what might be different the next time. So I think in order to really foster that sense of evangelization and that sense of mission, we need to give people permission to try new things and invest in new areas and to take those gospel risks.
Yeah. Amen. We always like to ask too, who do you think we should have on the podcast next?
Oh, that's a great question. Who do I want to throw under the bus here? No. Joe Dobrinsky used to work with me here at the Archdiocese. So I always make fun of Joe because, he went to Benedictine and then he did Focus. And then he came to work at the Archdiocese, and then he went to study at the Augustine Institute like I did. So I'm like, Joe, if you're just trying to be me, man, like we can hang out. No, so I give him a hard time, but Joe's a great guy with a great heart. He left the Archdiocese last year to go work for Seton Educational Partners, and they're doing great work in terms of sending missionary teachers into schools and forming a really Catholic vision around education. So I think Joe Dobrinsky would be a great guest on the podcast.
Okay, we'll reach out to him and try to get him on. Brian, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I love the work you guys are doing, and it's really important to help people be excellent in what they do and give them the hope, the inspiration, and the courage to go do it. So thank you for what you guys are doing.
Absolutely. Is there anywhere you want to invite our listeners to go to connect with you or support your ministry?
Yeah, obviously archstl.org/evangelization. All my contact info is on there if you wanted to reach out. I would, shameless plug here. We have our own podcast here at the Archdiocese that I host, hence like a decent setup here, sound wise. But it's called the Go and Make podcast, available wherever you find your podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever. So search out Go and Make, and we're just trying to help people develop a language around evangelization. And the way I describe that project, and really everything I'm working on, is we're trying to create a Catholic imagination for evangelization, because people don't even know what's possible. So the more we can help people dream and be inspired, I think the better. So all that work is including the podcast on the website and in different areas. So yeah, check it out.
Well, great. Thanks again for being on the podcast.
Yeah, of course.
And thank you, dear listeners, for listening to the Catholic Ministry Professionals podcast. If you want to transform your parish, but you're not sure where to start, we want you to download our free parish health assessment at catholicministryprofessionals.com/free assessment. It's just 36 questions, takes about 5 minutes, and afterward, you will have a color-coded picture of your parish's health that you can use to fuel better conversations, prioritize better work, and become a better leader. Email us at catholicminpros@gmail.com to share feedback. And of course, don't forget to text this episode to your priest or a friend in ministry that could benefit from it.
And with that, we'll see you in the vineyard.